Hi and welcome to my very first show on the Pole Position YouTube channel. I'm really delighted to be here. Hopefully it's a great opportunity for me, but a great opportunity for you, because I'm hoping to be able to shed a bit of light on the inside of Formula One. So my name is Marc Priestley. I worked for nearly a decade at the McLaren Formula One team, mostly as a mechanic, part of the pit stop crew, and later into management. So I hope to be able to shed a little bit of light on what goes on a little bit behind the scenes, a little bit of technical stuff that you don't normally get to hear about. So I want to know what you want to know from me. So please comment below. This show is going to be all about your feedback. Ask me questions, I'll try and give you the answers. Now we're going to look at some shots from the incredible Grand Prix at the weekend, sent back by James Moy, who was there, one of F1's best photographers. So thanks to him. And of course, it was an incredible race that was dominated from start to finish by these two guys in incredibly dominant fashion. You know, it was a two-horse race between these guys and then everybody else behind. And I think that's how the season's going to pan out. You know, what's really interesting, I thought, from this shot was, yes, this is on the podium. This is just off the back of an incredibly one-sided Grand Prix, but the two of them were fighting it out to the death. Of course, Lewis came off best on this occasion, but what's interesting is they're very pally-pally. They're shaking hands. It's all smiles at the moment. What's going to be really, really fascinating to watch as the season goes on, because I think this dominance is going to continue, is how the team and how these two handle their relationship with each other. We've all seen in 2007 how it can pan out with Lewis and Fernando, and we're going to talk about that in another video coming up, so do keep an eye on the channel for that one, because it's crucial to how this season could pan out for them. But really interesting. It's early days, like I say. Later on in the season, when they're really scrapping for that title, it's going to be interesting to see if they're still shaking hands and smiling at that point in the season. Now, because it was so dominant by Mercedes and has been since they first hit the track with these cars, it's a great shot here of Adrian Newey. You know, he's been used to dominating this sport for the last 4 years and beyond, really. And he's here scratching his head, looking at the Mercedes car. He's got his notebook under his arm, and having worked with Adrian, you know, I know he never stops thinking about this stuff. He's always got his notebook out. He's always sketching. He's always, when you're working as a mechanic, he's looking over your shoulder. He's sketching little tweaks. You know, and before you know it, they appear in your hands to bolt onto a racing car. So fascinating to see that he's really keeping a very close eye, as he always does, on the competition. And one of the things we're going to look at again in another video coming up is how Mercedes have managed to get this huge advantage. What's underneath the skin of this thing that's setting them aside from everybody else? We've got a pretty good idea of what it is. It's the engine installation, the turbo installation, and hopefully in a video coming up, like I say, keep a very close eye on it. We're going to explain how that works and how it's given them this huge advantage for the season. Of course, with engine freezes as they are, the people can't update their engine hardware until the end of the season. It's highly likely that dominance is going to continue. This was a great shot, because not just because it's the car, you know, in the middle of this incredible crash that, you know, Pastor Maldonado has quite a few questions to answer from this one. I hope you saw it at the weekend. Rosanna talks about it in the race room, so if you haven't seen that, click on the link, because that was a great show as well, explaining how this came about. What this does show, though, and what I'd like to highlight, is that this is the underside of the car, of course, something we never ever get to see. And the FIA a few years back introduced this stepped floor in the car. It's a 50mm step. And that slows down the car effectively. It reduces the aerodynamic downforce that the car can generate. And on top of here, what looks like just a plank of wood, and it does look like that, and I think in the old days it did used to be a plank of wood. This is the skid. This is what all teams have to have this bolted onto the car. It's a 10mm thick piece it's a composite material now, it's not wood, but the FIA use it to measure the wear rates of the car. So through these little holes here, at any point over a Grand Prix weekend, at the end of a Grand Prix, the FIA can come along and measure that gap, and it has to be within plus or minus 1mm of the specified dimension of 10mm. And if it's not, the team get thrown out. It's as simple as that. So they have to be very careful about their ride height, so they're not too low to the ground. They want to be as low as possible, because that generates more downforce. But if they're too low, and that's rubbing on the floor for an hour and a half around a Grand Prix, they are going to get chucked out of the race. Somebody asked me recently on Twitter about why the drivers walk the track on a Thursday, and I thought it was a really interesting point, because they've all been coming to this circuit. This is the 10th year of the Bahrain Grand Prix. They've all been coming here for a long, long time. They've got endless amounts of data. They've probably spent hours and hours and hours in simulators before getting to the track. So why do they walk around it on a Thursday afternoon? Well, They're doing it for a number of reasons. The driver, Sebastian Vettel, he's walking around here, he's looking at the circuit in minute detail, he's looking for little lumps and bumps in his braking zones, he's looking for marker points that he might be able to look out for braking zones, at the end of a straight. He's looking for the curbs, he's looking at the height of the curbs. Are they curbs that he needs to avoid when he's going around a corner? Does the information corroborate what was seen in the simulator? Is the data in the simulator absolutely accurate? The best way, at the end of the day, with all this technology, still the best way to check that out is to get out there and have a look with your eyes. The engineers here are from Renault, and they're doing the same sort of thing. They're looking for the best points, the optimum points to activate their ERS boost systems, the DRS systems, the different technologies in the car now that can be strategically deployed at different points around a lap. And this process on a Thursday is one of the best ways for them to find out when and where they can use that over the rest of the weekend. This little graphic here, which we've got from f1news.cz, so thanks very much for them, just shows the mileage that each team and each engine manufacturer covered over these 2 days. And what's interesting is, you might not be surprised to see that Mercedes covered way more mileage than anybody else as a team. Look how little mileage Lotus covered. That's a team who are struggling on track, desperately struggling on track. They're struggling financially as a company, and that little amount of mileage there over 2 days really isn't going to help them. This image just shows it a bit more graphically. Again, you can see how hugely dominant Mercedes are in terms of how much mileage they're able to cover. Look how the tiny little segment that Lotus have got there, that really isn't going to help them. And as engine manufacturers, again, Mercedes, through all of their teams, covered huge numbers of mileage. They're already streaks ahead of everybody else. They're able to develop at a much faster rate because they're getting feedback, they're getting data. So it's really going to be very, very difficult for anybody to catch up, I think, this season. So one of the things that we see at the test, which we don't see at a race weekend, occasionally you get them on a Friday, but time's very limited now on a Friday. So in in-season tests, teams are able, because they're unrestricted by the same rules that apply over a Grand Prix weekend, to bolt on all manner of different aerodynamic measuring devices. This is a great one from Caterham. It looks like an old-fashioned TV antenna, doesn't it? When they put these things on the cars, I can tell you it's a real pain for the mechanics, because these great big structures, and they are quite big, which aren't normally there, mean that it becomes all the more difficult for the mechanics to get in there and do the jobs that they need to do every day. The delicate bits of kit, you can't go climbing all over them. So whilst the aerodynamicists really desperately want them on the car, the mechanics really desperately don't. Now Ferrari here, same sort of thing. This one's measuring the airflow in front of the rear wheels. The Caterham was measuring the airflow behind the front wheels. And what they're doing is measuring how that airflow comes off the front wing, how it travels through here. So Caterham, with their aero rig here, are measuring how the front wheel and the suspension is disturbing that air before it travels to the rest of the car. Ferrari obviously are measuring it at the back, but it's all about corroborating the data that they've had from their wind tunnel testing before they've arrived at the circuit. Does it match up to how the aero sensors here are recording that data on the real car, on the real circuit? It's all very well simulating it. They want to check it out for real and make sure that they're correct. So that's really interesting. Like I say, a lot of cars had this sort of stuff on. Interesting as well, quick point to mention, which you can't see in the picture here, but does anybody remember the blown wheel nut saga from last year and the end of the year before? Teams were blowing airflow through their front brake ducts and out of the wheel nuts, or the hubs of the wheels, to try and control the airflow around this front wheel. Ferrari, the first team we've seen this year, bringing that back. So an interesting area of development for them. Now, one thing I really want to talk about is the test, these in-season tests. Like I say, there's 4 of them this season, generally off the back of a race weekend, 2 days each. Now, it doesn't sound like an awful lot, does it? 8 days, but off the back of all the testing that teams did pre-season, now into the race season, the race team itself are travelling, they're on the road for huge lengths of time. There's no test teams anymore. When I was working the sport, and I really don't want to sound like I'm banging on about how difficult it was in the olden days, but these guys really have got it easy. No, I'm joking. So, in the old days we had a separate test team, but testing was unrestricted. We could test as much as we wanted, and for myself, working at McLaren, a big team with an almost unrestricted budget, we did test as much as we wanted. Nowadays, it's just the race team, so any testing has to be carried out by these guys. So they've done all the pre-season tests. Now they couldn't go home on Sunday night after the race. They've had to stay for another 2 or 3 days to conduct this test. They're back in the factory now. They've got 3 or 4 days before some of them have to then head off to China. So it gives you a real idea of how their schedule is getting more and more restricted, more and more tight. And it's getting almost to the point of breaking point. You know, we can't have much more. We're asking an awful lot of these guys at the moment. We can't do very much more before things might have to start changing and people start looking at dedicated test teams and that sort of thing again. Now, at the end of that test, everybody packed up on Wednesday night, and this shot here, which you may not be aware of, this is the sea freight. This is McLaren's sea freight. Now, most people know that see at the end of a Grand Prix often teams packing everything into huge containers. That's the air freight. That's the key things like the car, the tools, all the spare parts, all the garage equipment. That gets sent straight back to the factory by air because it's quick. They have 4 or 5 sets of these, all of these containers containing consumables, containing the sort of non-car specific items that they use at every race. And these sets, these 4 or 5 sets are constantly going around the world by sea, by boat. It takes a long time. It's taken months for this kit to get to Bahrain. They will have sent it probably in early January. And of course it's arrived here, it's timed to arrive on time. And it saves them money, that's the reason for doing it. They actually share shipping containers with other teams to save a bit of cash. And it's a great, you know, it's a great way of teams corroborating together. It's a really nice thing because in the past we haven't really seen that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I want your feedback, so comment below, give me some questions, tell me what you want to hear, what you want to know about, and I'll try and help you out. Follow us on Twitter at PolePositionP1. You can get me at F1Elvis on Twitter. And don't forget, subscribe now. Look out for the video coming on Mercedes. That's going to be a really interesting one. But thank you very much for watching. See you next time.
Ferrari, the cars that make Formula One sing.